Hello. If everyone would take their seats, please, or take a seat. If a struggle breaks out for seats, we'll figure out some algorithm for adjudicating it. Hopefully you enjoyed your lunch and are ready for an afternoon of some more informative talks. I take great pleasure in introducing our next speaker. In the history of CERIAS, we've had a number of people who've come in and helped make transformational changes in what we did and in the field in general. And our next speaker here is one of those people that I'm happy to say hired her first as a staff director with the center, showed great dedication, finishing up her PhD, and after working with us a little bit, took a faculty position, advanced through the ranks, and is now the Furnas Professor of Information Technology. She served as the Associate Director for Education and Outreach for the center for almost her entire time here. We were just comparing notes. She's been to 15 out of 16 of the symposia, which is a pretty good record. We'll forgive her that one. But
I wasn't born yet.
Wasn't born yet. I'm not going to.
Good call. Yeah, good call.
So please join me in welcoming Melissa Dark as she tells us about one of her other very transformational efforts that's been going on, not only here at Purdue, but at several universities across the nation. Melissa.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks very much. So the project is called INSuRE. It stands for Information Security Research and Education. And it's a pretty young project still. I think this is officially, for me, the third year. But for other universities, it's just their first year. For other sponsors, such as Pacific Northwest National Labs, just their first semester. So it's a young project. So I just have a few slides here, and then I'll do most of the talking, trying to help you understand this multidimensional, multifaceted, growing initiative. So what is this project? Well, first of all, it's an attempt to create a persistent, agile network of CAER universities. So the National Security Agency and the Department of Homeland Security have this Center of Academic Excellence program. It started, in maybe 1998. Purdue was one of the inaugural 7 that was given this designation for excellence in information security education. And about 5 or 6 years ago, they started a new designation, which is for excellence in information security research. So currently, there are 60 universities that have this designation in the country. It is a designation that comes to the university, and it's acknowledging our sole contributions to information security research for each of the 60 universities. It doesn't currently have us as a functioning network in any sort of fashion, where we together try to do something to advance information security research in the country. And so one of the goals, as I sat down and I talked to NSA about this and talked to a colleague who helped craft the vision for it, Neil Ziering, who's the lead technical director for the Information Assurance Directorate at NSA. And Neil said, we have this program, but we don't have a good way to work with these 60 universities. There's not a persistent network to where if we had a research need, a research challenge, we could enter it into the network. Instead, what we have to do is we have to go to each of the 60. And so oftentimes, as you well know, distributed systems can be quite robust. I mean, they can also be quite fragile, but they can be quite robust. And so part of the goal here is to create a network of these universities that helps us function in an agile manner. So cybersecurity threats happen quickly. Universities are not necessarily agile institutions, and especially, I think, in our research capabilities. The entire system that is set up in this country to fund research is very deliberate and planful. And so sometimes you are working on things today. If you're a researcher and you write a grant proposal, you are responding to a call for proposals that sometimes started 4 or 5 years ago. You know, and then you submit your proposal into the system. It could be 6 to 8 months before you find out whether or not you're going to get funded. It could be another 3 to 4 months before you actually have the money. You know, so it doesn't work fast. And that's not necessarily good for us in cyberspace. The landscape changes fairly rapidly, so the question becomes, how do we not just create a persistent network, but how do we create an agile network? So as universities with CAER designation, that means that you probably have a pretty significant footprint in graduate education. You know, you have a lot of graduate students. Those graduate students are charged with doing a thesis or a dissertation. So you have some capacity. You have a supply of human capital who, if you could have this persistent, agile network, you could put onto some of these research challenges. So where do we get some of these research challenges? Who has real-world research needs? So currently the network, which I would tell you is not today persistent, and we're trying to become agile, but I think that we still have a lot to learn and a lot to do to become an agile network. But it is 10 of these 60 CAER universities. And it is the National Security Agency, the Pacific Northwest National Labs, and Nick Multari is here. I'll just point him out because at break, if any of you had questions about my perspective, a university perspective, or a sponsor perspective, and then several of the students are here, or a student perspective, then people would be around and could answer those questions for you. So it's NSA, Pacific Northwest National Labs, Sandia National Labs, the Indiana Office of Technology, and IoT is starting a new initiative called the Indiana Information Sharing and Analysis Center. Hans Vargas will be talking about that at 3:45. So IoT is a new partner, and I think that Oak Ridge is going to come on as a partner for the fall. So the persistent agile network, the universities, and then the sponsors. And I'll come back when I talk a little bit more about the day-to-day events of how it functions to talk about what we do with these problems and give you an idea of what the problems are. A second goal of INSuRE is to innovate or transform graduate education. So this is a goal certainly for the 10 universities who participate. When you educate students through the thesis or the dissertation to have some sort of a research experience in their graduate career, you're trying, of course, to give them certain research competencies. And the more traditional research competencies are things like locating and understanding primary literature, research literature, understanding how to formulate a research problem statement, how to design a study, how to collect data, how to interpret data, how to communicate your research problem and your research results to diverse stakeholders. Those are all very traditional research competencies that have been around for graduate education for a long time. So we also have the need for some new competencies in graduate education, and it includes things like being able to work in interdisciplinary teams. Interdisciplinary research has been the wave over at least the last, decade, maybe 20 years. If you submit research proposals, you know that more and more you have to have a team of people, frequently an interdisciplinary team, and oftentimes a multi-institutional team. So when graduate students graduate, they're supposed to go out and function that way in their research career, but there's very little about their research training that asks them to do that. The dissertation, the thesis is a solo endeavor, as it should be. But we think that there needs to be something else in their research traineeship that gives them the ability to function in interdisciplinary teams, cross-institutional teams, that gives them exposure to and experience in developing a research network, because that's important. And then there is, of course, the need driven by computational science and data science for students to learn how to work with increasing data volumes, varieties, quickly changing data, the velocity of the data. So part of what we're doing in INSuRE is trying to innovate or transform graduate education so that students have some of those emerging competencies to complement their traditional competencies. So the first bullet was an attempt to tell you at a very high level how the nation and maybe some of the sponsors could see INSuRE, and then at the university level, how we specifically as faculty, graduate chairs, deans of graduate education, how we might see INSuRE. And then the third bullet here is meant to convey how students might see INSuRE, because they're also a big part of it. I told you earlier that they supply a lot of the human capital that we put to work in the INSuRE project. And so what is their experience going through it? First of all, we're very interested in the students who participate in INSuRE having, that phrase, real-world problems that they work on. So anytime you think that the problem that you are working on might get used and consumed by a sponsor, I think it adds an interesting dimension to your work. I know that I was a graduate student. Most of us here in this room, I think, we're graduate students. So we all feel that there's something practical and real and important driving our work when we go to write that thesis proposal or that dissertation proposal. At least we hope so. But we also know that a lot of theses and dissertations end up on microfiche or, on a shelf in a digital library and aren't accessed and used. And so when we provide to students problems that come from our sponsor agencies, that sponsors say, this is a need we have now, I think it adds an interesting dimension to the reality of what the students are working on. It is project-based learning. So students do learn about research through doing it. And several of the students who are in this room today would say, Dr. Dark, do you think that I should take several research classes before I take the INSuRE class so I can learn how to do research before I have to actually do it? And I say, no, not really. It's kind of like riding a bike. I could sit here and I could tell you how to ride a bike, but you're going to get on that bike, and you're not going to be able to ride that bike just because I've conveyed to you how you ride that bike. And you're going to have to do what most of us did when we first rode a bike. You're going to have to fall. You're going to have, you know, a hurt knee and a dislocated shoulder. And I think that they probably view me as the pavement some days. But it is meant to provide an experience. And I think that that's really important. I think that there are a lot of things about research that you only learn through doing it, through really doing it. So how does this really happen on a day-to-day basis right now? And then let me tell you, after I tell you how it happens on a day-to-day basis, things that the persistent agile network, the transforming graduate education, the things that we're not doing yet but we hope to do in the future. So this semester, 8 of those 10 universities have students enrolled in a class. It is an applied research problems class. We collect about 4 weeks before the semester begins, maybe only 2 weeks before the semester begins, maybe a couple of days before the semester begins. We collect problems from our sponsor agencies. And so this semester, I think that the problem set has maybe 30 different problems. There's a title to the problem. If you went to www.insurehub.org, you would see the problem set. So there's a title, there's a brief paragraph description, and then every one of our sponsors also gives us a technical director who's a key point of contact on that particular problem, as Nick is for the problem that PNNL gave us this semester. So we take those problems in, and we have 8 institutions that have students enrolled this semester. There are 59 students enrolled across these 8 universities. These 59 students form into 19 teams, and they are working on 16 different projects. So obviously we have duplication on a couple of the projects, which is fine with us. For this semester, for the first time, we have cross-institutional teams. I told you that we wanted students to have an opportunity to learn how to work on a distributed research team. And we did not do that last year by design. You only want to tackle so many variables at one time. But for the first time this semester, we have a cross-institutional team with John Zage, Robert Wells from Purdue, and Marcella Fardum from Mississippi State, and then a cross-institutional team with Richard Hilgers from Purdue and Jerry Ozier from Dakota State University. So 8 universities, 4 sponsors, 59 students, 19 teams, 16 problems. The semester starts and we spend the first 2 weeks with the technical directors talking about the problem. We use WebEx to bring everybody into class on a Friday afternoon. In some cases, you can see the technical directors. The tech directors from NSA usually do not leave the facility, and so they're a voice on the phone. There's no video capability. And they animate. They bring that project to life. Students are asked to read about the project beforehand, have questions prepared, so that they can start to become familiar. Then students prepare at least 2 bids. They say, this is me, Melissa Dark. These are my capabilities. These would be at least 2 projects that I think would be in my wheelhouse, given my capabilities, my interests, and what I might like to learn. And so we take those bids, and then we start looking at forming teams. And we look at we as the teaching staff, and I'll point out who they are in just a few minutes. We look to form teams that do, first of all, appeal to students' interests and places where they think they have capability. But we also look to form interdisciplinary teams, complementary teams, where the teams would build on different backgrounds try to get at some of that interdisciplinary nature. We've tried in the past to get students thinking a little bit about what other skill sets might that problem require that they don't have in their team, and how might they access those skill sets to bring that knowledge to bear. So pretty quickly, after about 4 weeks, students are formed into teams and they have written a proposal that they give to their technical director. And I call this the process of it no longer being the technical director's problem, but becoming your problem, right? Because if the students are going to do anything effective, they need to own the problem, you know? And I think if we want them to go out into the workforce and to be contributing members in a research capacity to cybersecurity, we want them to learn how to own hard, open-ended, complex cybersecurity research problems. You know, there is sometimes a little. This is maybe not from the student's viewpoint. This is maybe from my viewpoint. There's a little bit of resistance because there's a sponsor. Students sometimes think, but what do you want me to do? But, you know, I have to do what the sponsor wants me to do. And then in that case, they're not owning the problem. You know, they're a worker on a research team doing a part that somebody else told them they had to do. So we try to work our way through that. And after the proposal is approved, they commence work. And that leaves them really only about 10 weeks, 2/3 of a semester. They feel that it's way too early to commence work, and we all know it's way too early to commence work. But if I keep telling you how to ride that bike and you keep not getting on that bike, then you're not going to ride the bike. And so we do find that by the, and let me tell you a few more things before I jump to the end of this semester. We use almost weekly updates with the technical directors. There are times when the students just have a big bite that they need to take, and it doesn't make sense to talk to the technical directors the next week. Maybe we should just wait 2 weeks. We just made that decision. We were across the hall at 3:07 on the phone with a tech director for the weekly status meeting at 10:30 this morning. We said, this is a big bite, let's wait 2 weeks. It's on a project. I haven't given you any examples of project titles. This is a project that is modeling interdependent risks in layered solutions. The National Security Agency, under the Commercial Solutions for Classified program, develops capability packages that are, you know, layered defense in depth solutions. And so you'll have more than one software or hardware product in that layered solution, and the question becomes, if those products share certain properties, what does that suggest or implicate for interdependent risk of that capability package? So that would be one example. You'll see some posters at the poster session also from the INSuRE project. Nicole Hans, who is here, is working with Sandia National Labs, and it's on an integrity levels. It's really, how do you get a system to a point where it can detect for itself when it has been infected, instead of trying to create an antiviral solution for every single piece of malware that comes out. Deriving intelligence from an encrypted stream of VPN traffic to things like cyber resilience. We've got a fair amount in the body of literature on cyber risk assessment, but risk assessment is probably a little bit different from developing resilience, you know? So what do you need to think about having resilient infrastructures, socio-technical infrastructures? That's how I think about your problem, anyway. NSA's back door is Alan Sherman, Doug Jacobson from Iowa State University, and Patrick Tague from Carnegie Mellon. we're looking if we can find a little additional funding. We're looking to add maybe Johns Hopkins, the University of Houston, the University of Florida, and UT San Antonio would also like to join. And they're part of the 60 CAERs. Neil Ziering's vision for this is not just a persistent agile network, but one that includes all 60 CAERs.
So if you want the University of Washington contact, I can give you that.
Okay. And we're trying to both grow, because it's exciting, and we're trying to manage our growth, and we're trying to make sure we have resources. But we'll talk at break. And I'm very grateful to the many INSuRE students who've been a part of the class. I think that they've learned a lot. I hope they're learning how fun it can be, how exhilarating it can be to ride the bike. It's really hard when you're pedaling uphill. But man, that downhill, once you got the problem, you're looking in the bullseye, once you've got that problem and you feel like you're really onto something and you know how to solve it, it can be very exhilarating. So I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Melissa. Oh,
Yeah.
So this problem of picking a big problem
Yes.
and then figuring out after you've picked it how you're going to parse it and break it down into bite-sizable. Are you documenting the learning process? And is this research effort a research effort
Not yet.
that's worthy of documenting the work processes and the lessons learned?
We do believe it's worthy of documenting it, but we aren't documenting it yet. So it's a good question, and one we've talked about. Yeah.
okay. Well, thank you very much, Melissa.
Thank you.